In Nicaragua, on the other hand, we have Augusto Cesar Sandino, was an anti-imperialist whose guerrilla war against the U.S. Marines made him famous. And the U.S. intervention against Sandino put this guy named Anastasio Somoza, who would have several generations after him, ruling for the benefit of his own family and not for the people. And Anastasio Somoza was a puppet of the US. You know, he was very happy helping the US so he could get his own benefits from them. Who assassinated Sandino and used National Guard to take over Nicaragua. So he used military force and fear on people to control the country. Various Somozas ran the country like a private estate in the 1940s into the 1970s. And Anastasio Somoza's son, also Anastasio, his name was Anastasio, who ruled in the 1970s, was head of Nicaragua's US supported National Guard. The Somoza family wealth grew to a fifth of Nicaragua's best land and the country's airline and many other things. So they were filthy rich thanks to being a friend of the US and really ruling with corruption because everything was going to their family. In 1961, a revolutionary movement formed in Havana. The revolutionaries of the 1960s called themselves Sandinista National Liberation Front. And in 1978, the dictator Anastasio Somoza assassinated Joaquin Chamorro, a publisher of a conservative opposition newspaper, and his death united the right and left against the Somozas. And they will actually overthrow the Somozas. Anti-Somoza parties defeated the National Guard, and Somoza fled Nicaragua for Miami. He came to the U.S. He had friends in the U.S., right? He asked for hospitality of Paraguay Alfredo Stroessner, a repressive dictator at the time in Paraguay. Before unpacking his bags, the Argentine guerrillas found him. And they say they put an anti-tank rocket through the windshield of his bulletproof Mercedes-Benz and he died. The Sandinistas took charge after that. And Violeta Chamorro, who was the widow of the murdered publisher that was killed by Somoza, represented the anti-Somoza forces of the right. Cuba, France, Spain, and West Germany, even Jimmy Carter sent help, but Ronald Reagan soon replaced them, right? And following their defeat in 1979, Somoza's National Guard had regrouped in Honduras under the CIA supervision. And the Argentine military, triumphant in their dirty war, sent trainers for this new US proxy force called the Contras for counter-revolutionaries. And Reagan called them freedom fighters. So these counter-revolutionaries that were being trained by the CIA were called freedom fighters. And the freedom fighters will cause a lot of bloody wars within these Latin American countries. The US forces laid explosive mines in Nicaragua's harbors to cut off the trade with other countries, making the economy disintegrate. That was their tactic, right? And by 1988, Nicaragua had quintuple digit inflation. In 1990, Sandinistas lose the election, and Violeta Chamorro became the first woman ever elected president in Latin America. So it was the first woman president in Nicaragua and in Latin America, Violeta Chamorro. In the 1990s, Nicaragua remained divided. Even Chamorro's own sons were Sandinista and anti-Sandinista. There was a division of Sandinistas and anti-Sandinistas in Nicaragua. The uprising against Somoza and then the Contra War killed tens of thousands of Nicaraguans. In El Salvador, the indigenous people were pushed off the agricultural lands to the volcanic slopes. And these slopes were fertile for coffee. So in the 1870s, the coffee planters also wanted the slopes. Isn't that sad? They pushed them to the volcanic slopes and then they find out that it's good and they push them out again. And the liberal reforms privatized the lands and coffee planters, brought them indigenous Salvadorians, became like peons on estates and at once being their own land. with low wages and began to starve. Isn't that sad? So they take their lands and they make them work as peons on those lands and with very low wages and starving, which is sad. In the 1920s, the Salvadorian Communist Party attempted to lead an uprising and were crushed in the slaughter of 1932. And the military-controlled governments ruled for almost half a century. And anti-communists, they were anti-communist and they were allies of the U.S. There's an archbishop named Oscar Romero, named head of the Salvadorian church for being conservative. Well, he wasn't a communist, but when he saw the anti-communist death squad, like killing people, the people of El Salvador, he changed his heart, all these innocent people. And they were even targeting priests and nuns who were helping these poor people. So the archbishop spoke against the army, and he was killed one day during Mass in 1980. So he's known as a hero of the revolution as well for speaking out and losing his life for the cause. Salvadorian revolutionaries named Farabundo Martí National Liberation Front. Farabundo Martí was martyred hero of the Salvadorian left, and he was a communist organizer of the indigenous uprising of 1932. And through the 1980s, the Farabundo Martí National Liberation Front guerrillas held large portions of the Salvadorian countryside. They blew up bridges and power lines and imposed war taxes on vehicles traveling through their country through their territory. The Salvadorian military, with the U.S. training and equipment, rode into guerrilla territory to destroy the missions. And the army conducted mass executions of peasants suspected of aiding guerrillas. And you will see this civil war going on in El Salvador. There's a really good movie that you can watch about that period. It's called Voces Inocentes, or Innocent Voices. Talks about the life of this little kid who lived in El Salvador during that time. So in 1981, an elite U.S. trained battalion entered a tiny village of El Mozote and killed everybody. Hundreds of named civilian men, women, and children by mistake, and they had nothing to do with the guerrillas. That's how bad it was. Salvadorians fled by the tens and tens of thousands, many of them to the U.S. That's why you have a lot of refugiados de la guerra, like war refugees, from El Salvador living in the United States. And the anti-communists won with the U.S. aid. The death toll reached 60,000 people. 60,000 people died. The 1990s elections ended the Sandinista revolution in Europe, and the rapid crumbling of the Soviet bloc had begun. In 1992, the FMLN signed a peace treaty and laid down its arms, and Guatemalan insurgents were running out of steam. And a peace born of exhaustion, because they were so tired from fighting, settled over Central America. And they said the Cold War was over, but in Latin America, nobody had won. There were only losers. So few guerrilla spots remained in the 1990s in Colombia, Peru, and southern Mexico. So that's it for this chapter, you guys. I'll see you next time. Bye.